So just a housekeeping thing, and then we will start two housekeeping things. I should introduce myself. So apologies that my video is off. It actually makes me feel a lot better because I like, hiding behind curtains or doors or something and just being a disembodied voice. But I bought a new computer and I didn't test it first, and my camera's not on. So apologies. But my name is Leigh Koonce. I guess, yes, I am recording. Um, I guess I should introduce myself in two ways. First, I am the chair of the Jefferson County Democratic Party and the West Virginia Democratic County Chairs Association. That's important because part of what we're talking about this evening is sort of a dispelling of a lot of the narratives coming out of the vice presidential nominee on the other side of the aisle. But then also, I'm the organizer of the Shepherdstown Book Festival. And it's a great event coming up in September, and I love everything to do with books and writing and the arts. So I thought, why not get some of these very talented people together and let them talk about Appalachia, J.D. Vance, the future, etc. So I am recording. I hope that's okay with everyone. I'm not going to post it all over social media, but I know that there are some folks who wanted to attend who couldn't. So that will be made available to them. So just so everyone's aware. And I will stop talking at this juncture and invite our panelists to introduce themselves um, one by one. And we will start with Bryan Staggers.
Thanks, Lee. My name's Bryan Staggers. I am an actor, writer, musician, and educator, currently based in Los Angeles, California. But I'm originally from Kaiser, West Virginia. Got my schooling at Kaiser High School, graduated with my BFA from West Virginia University, and recently got a master's in Appalachian Studies from Shepherd. So Appalachia is still very much with me, even though I'm out here on the West Coast.
Thanks, Bryan. Eileen?
Thanks, Lee. Hi, I'm Eileen Espinoza, and I'm also an expat to the West Coast. I'm living currently in the Bay Area, but I'm originally from Hedgesville, West Virginia, in the Eastern Panhandle. Here in NorCal, I teach at community college, and I also teach graduate students online. I'm a creative writing professor and an academic researcher, and working on a book project right now about death and grief rituals in the West. Yeah, thanks so much for having me here tonight, Lee.
Thanks, Eileen. Jonathan?
Hi, everybody. I'm Jonathan Corcoran. I am a writer and professor. I'm originally from Elkins, West Virginia, born and raised. I currently live in Brooklyn, New York, another expat Appalachian here. All my work centers on the queer experience in rural West Virginia. So it's a place that I consider my home and I'm very concerned about. And I'm so happy to be here with everyone tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. Matthew? Or Matt, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I answered to both. I'm Matt Ferrence. I'm from north of the Mason-Dixon, Indiana County, Pennsylvania, and I currently live in northwestern Pennsylvania in Crawford County. I'm a creative writing professor at Allegheny College, and I've been writing for a while about images and Appalachian identity. My book prior to the one that just came out was about figuring out your Appalachian, Northern Appalachian, when you're about 30 years, not realizing you're part of that region. And my latest book was about my folly in 2020 when I decided to run for the state House Representatives in Pennsylvania against we'll just say a conservative person. I'm sure it'll come up again. And the shocker is I lost. And that's my book is called I Hate It Here, Please Vote For Me. And thinking about what means when we're losing elections, we're, quote, supposed to lose. I also used to show goats at the county fair. I think that's important.
Thanks, Matt. Torli?
Yeah, I'm Torli Bush. I'm from Webster Springs, West Virginia originally. I'm currently living in Bridgeport. I did my undergrad in mechanical engineering at WVU, did an MFA in creative writing at West Virginia Wesleyan, and my first collection of poetry is releasing the 1st of October from Pulley Press in Seattle. Was an ordeal and a journey to get to, but I'm glad that it's coming out.
Thanks very much to all five of you. We have had some folks who have just joined. Just want to let everyone know that we are recording. Probably told you she signed on. And if you could all remain muted with your cameras off until the conclusion of the panelists' remarks. We will have an opportunity, hopefully at the end, for just a couple questions, but just to avoid sort of ambient noise and disruption, if those could remain off, except for our five panelists. So really appreciate it. So we'll get into sort of one of the first questions, and Eileen, this is for you to start, and just sort of reflecting upon your time spent in Appalachia, reading, studying about it. What are two of the most oppressive things we are facing here? And, you know, folks say things like the opioid epidemic, lack of infrastructure, poor educational opportunities, the fact that young people are leaving, all of that stuff. But what are your top two? What do you think we're really facing here that we need to start pushing back on?
Oh, I just think this is such a great question, and thanks for asking it. For me, in my experience, having grown up almost my whole life in West Virginia and then having spent essentially the last 10 years living away from it, I actually moved back there last year with my wife for 1 year for a position at my alma mater, Shepherd University. And what we encountered as a queer couple, even in a very affluent town of West Virginia, was just a fundamental lack of resource and community. I think that there are so many pockets of progressive culture and woven all throughout Appalachia. But in my experience of moving back and in my childhood experience in living in Appalachia, always what seemed to be at the root of all of my family's issues, my own issues, and in my return the last year was a fundamental lack of resource. So what did that look like? Lack of resource for community, queer community, people of color, my wife, the poet Joshua Jennifer Espinoza, trans woman poet. We weren't exactly at home there as a queer couple, even in 2024, and in a town that had pride flags hanging from every restaurant. So yeah, a lack of resource and community. And I think too, our expats, most of us here on the panel are not there. A lot of West Virginia, for me, West Virginia, and then Appalachia's greatest problem solvers and thinkers and talent have left because we can't maybe have the lifestyle that we'd like to have there. So I feel as equally part of the problem and resistant to the proposed solutions for that.
Thanks so much, Eileen. Jonathan?
Wrong button. Okay. Yes. Thank you, Eileen. That all rings true for me too, as a queer person who left because my family couldn't accept me for being gay. Actually, I was disowned for being gay. So this all rings very true what you said to me, and I really appreciate you bringing that up today. Two things that I want to talk about that I've been thinking about a lot. I want to start with the word extraction and extractive politics. So, you know, you can't live in West Virginia without knowing the history of extraction in our state, and that extends way back in history, starting with coal companies, energy companies taking the resources, making money off of them, and then moving that out of state. That continued down the road during my childhood as big corporations moved in and shut down small towns and mom and pop stores, and paid people a pittance to work there. This continues further as we now have a new wave of extractive politicians who take what they want and take what they need they create policies and laws that are aggressive and don't benefit anyone but themselves. When they don't have enough money anymore because they've created some terrible laws, they destroy our institutions that are designed to get people up and lift each other up, like West Virginia University, which we all just watched a bloodbath happen last year. So I think extraction and the history of extraction continues. Some of us end up fleeing because of politics. Some of us are forced out, speaking as expat Appalachians, and we watch in horror as this continues to happen from afar. The other thing that's personal for me is something that's going to become more and more of an oppressive issue for West Virginia and for Appalachia is climate change. I want to bring that up today because my family all still live back in my hometown and are subject to repeated floods and damaging storms. We've watched over and over again as the same companies who have created the conditions in which we have more storms and more floods continue to leave us with broken homes and the bill for the damage that they've created. So I guess it's all related to extraction in some ways. So I hope we're paying attention to that. And I don't have an answer for it, but it is on my mind. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I'll echo all of that. And then I want to take a slightly different tack on it. Because what I've thought of candidate and I think about all the time as a writer, and I think all of us think about this as creative individuals, as stories. And I think there was a line I used when I was a candidate that we live the stories we tell and the stories that are told about us. And so part of like this expat issue, that's one of the stories that's told when you're a little different. It's like, well, you have to get out of here. And it's true, right? Like people have to live that. But we need to think about who's getting to tell our region and what that story is so we can start changing the quote inevitabilities of things. When I think about what Jonathan's talking about, climate change, right, that defies one of the dominant national stories of Appalachia is that of course we're all beholden to fossil fuel and extractive industry, and there's truth to that economically, but we're not morons, and we can see when the creek is rising and we are impacted by those issues. So we have to start aggressively telling the stories of who counts as an Appalachian, who's been here, who's always been here, and how the imagery of the region has always been controlled externally by storytellers who wanted to paint the people of the region in a certain way so that they could extract from it. It happened with religious folks coming down and wanting to get money for their churches. And so that was the churches were going to save the poor backward hillbillies. And then it happened with timber, and then it happened with coal, and it's happening in Pennsylvania in a big way with fracking. And those are all policy issues that I think work against us because people just believe the story that's happening. And that's why J.D. Vance is so important in a terrible way in this, because he's giving the story everybody expects about Appalachia, and too many people are ready to accept it because they haven't heard the other ones.
Thanks for that. Torli?
So the two that I would say first, at least here in West Virginia, I think one of the most oppressive things that we face is a culture war and fear-mongering politic in the state legislature. People wanting to focus on controlling people's private lives and targeting minority populations, making overtures to keep getting reelected instead of focusing on economic change that could actually benefit people. And secondly, I'm going to echo some of the sentiment that's already been said and say the extractive capitalism that goes on here. West Virginia, primarily being a mono economy based on coal, and the people in power tying our fate to that. It became this web that sort of stretched out and underlies, I think, some of the lack of educational opportunities that has led to a loss of state resource in terms of money. So you wind up seeing, in part, cuts to education. You see the teacher strikes trying to fight for a fairer wage and being able to teach, all of the content that they can to their students. And that's also been a part of people from my generation around that time just wanting to leave and continuing to leave. One thing that I think has been good as far as the education goes, to just not have everything be completely bleak, is there's been a bit of a shift towards technical education, and realizing like not everybody needs to go to college, and kind of destroying that dialogue, which has also been good. And I'm hoping that we can continue in that line, and maybe eventually work our way out of this.
Thanks so much. And Bryan.
Wonderful points abound. I second all of those that have been raised. I think when I'm looking at somebody like who writes this book called Hillbilly Elegy, presuming to be proclaiming the death knell of an entire culture, it is that so often the Appalachian story is co-opted by people for personal benefit. And it happens over and over again in the repetition of archetypes, stereotypes, that it's similar to the battle that, West Virginians at the hands of exploitative politicians are constantly going up against a select few who are working the benefits of the land and its people for their own merits. I think one of the keys, though, that I think, especially in contemporary story, we live in an age where you don't need to, we have cameras on our phones that are able to record just as well as anybody else in the film industry, obviously within reason. But we live in an age where tools are so accessible, but some of that infrastructure still lacks in West Virginia. And I think, I was working in some educational programming with West Virginia schools during COVID, and it exposed, when we had the shutdowns, for example, internet is still broadly unavailable in so many regions of West Virginia. And we function in a society now where that is a public utility. And so the fact that is not number one priority to bring Appalachian voices to the forefront, while we focus on these other social war things and manifestation of fears, I find that those are the two most pressing opposing forces in Appalachia today.
Thanks, Bryan. So our next question will start with Jonathan, and then Matthew, Torli, Bryan, and Eileen, but I'll give you all a nod when you're up. And I was sort of presumptuous in this question, but what are your fondest memories of growing up in Appalachia? And I guess my presumption is that you do have fond memories of growing up in Appalachia. So I would hope you all do, but do feel free to share if you have a particularly not fond memory as well. So we'll start with Jonathan.
I've probably, like everyone, gone through my rebellious phase where I hated home for a while. I at 18 run away. But I was thinking, when you asked this question, I was really glad you asked this question. The first thing that came to mind, and I'll run through this quickly, is just the landscape and growing up and being in nature. We have possibly some of the most beautiful landscapes in our country. Every minute of my childhood, I think of mountains and rivers and forests, and that is a gift. It's in your bones when you grow up in that. But I wanted to spin this a little different. I was thinking about growing up, and I realized that all of my fondest memories had to do with the wonderful people in my community, beginning with teachers in school who inspired me. I recently did a book reading, and my third grade teacher showed up at one of my book signings. And I said to her, "Do you remember being in third grade and sitting me in a corner and telling me that I had something in me. I should start writing. And so she sat me in a corner and said, you're going to be an artist. I see what you're doing and what you're capable of. So again, this idea that the people in my community lifted me up and told me that I had something to offer. And I wanted to zoom in a little further. I was really lucky to have this community theater in Elkins, West Virginia, a town of 7,000 people. People don't think of small towns and rural Appalachia as having these thriving art scenes, but so many Appalachian places do. And they are the backbone of many of these communities. Art is vital. When I was a young kid, I was not out of the closet yet. And I was scared about coming out because it was the 90s and the early 2000s, and it wasn't always a safe time. Still, in many ways, not safe in a lot of places. This wonderful person, I'll shout her name out, Missy Armentrout McCollum, took a building in downtown Elkins, converted it into a community theater, ran what she called an apprentice program, brought in she's probably brought in over 1,000 youth through that program and trained them in theater, gave them a safe space to explore, to play, to create art, and to feel loved. And so when I think about what home and what Appalachia means to me, it's places like that community theater where people care about the people in their towns, and they want to give them an opportunity to grow, to play, to imagine, to live and thrive. And that is the best version of Appalachia to me. And that's the best memories I have from my childhood. So yeah, it's really about the people. And I can't say enough about the thriving arts that make Appalachia what it is.
That's wonderful. Matt?
Yeah, I'm going to extend community and sort of think about rebirth or learning your Appalachian. Is sort of like thinking about my childhood. I can think about a lot of the common stuff like catching crayfish and running through the fields and that. But I didn't realize is maybe the wrong verb, but in a certain way, I didn't realize that I was from Appalachia until I was about 30 years old when I was at WVU doing graduate work. It just never had crossed my mind because in Pennsylvania, for whatever reason, people don't think about it. And I was introduced to the culture by the culture in West Virginia. And I feel like West Virginia as a state and the people that Jonathan's talking about gave me a sense of a regional identity that growing up in Western Pennsylvania, not in Pittsburgh, I couldn't be a Pittsburgher because that's a thing and that's a cool thing. But I grew up in the country. So like, what was I? But then there was suddenly this commonality and I've become, I don't know, a proselytizer for Pennsylvania Appalachians in some ways and telling people, did you know you're an Appalachian? And they're like, no, we're not. It's pronounced Appalachia. That happens all the time up here. But that kind of warmth and connection to arts community, obviously, as a writer, to recognize that there was some relationship to people in place that mattered deeply to me in my life was very eye-opening in my first early midlife crisis when I was about 30 years old. And so I've been reckoning with that even before I knew it. And even as I've wandered around, lived in different places in the country, as soon as I come back into the mountains of southwestern Pennsylvania and West Virginia, it just feels like I'm home. And the people have never questioned that it's my home too, which I appreciate.
Wonderful. Torli?
So I thought about this question and two memories that I can give growing up that are probably my fondest was one time fishing with my grandfather at Big Ditch Lake in Webster County. We went over and it was raining and he said, you know, we're not going to catch anything, and walked up to the lake bank and we wound up casting into a school of bluegill and caught like 4 or 5 in a row. Another one was down in like the town of Webster. There's a small island that like the Elk River's kind of formed that's connected to the town's Baker's Island. Basketball court on there, played all the time growing up into high school. One time playing with my best friend Marshall, we were everybody else had gone home, was getting on to like 11 o'clock at night. My grandmother finally called me and was like, hey, you need to come home. We were just down there playing basketball. But that's kind of just where I was at. Lot of good memories for me are connected to sports and the land and just the people I know.
That's great. Bryan?
Yeah, I mean the land, hands down. I I think back to being a kid and having the opportunity to have a great family filled with love and activity where we would gather at my grandparents' house and play pickup football games and make up games that I had to learn that nobody else played, like a game called Ducky. I think my brother is on here. He'll know what I'm talking about. And that sense of the magic of that land. I think it's why it's so ripe for storytelling because it's so old, it's so majestic, and I absolutely look back on the days of being a kid in summer and being kicked out of the house and having to go out and play and thinking that I would so much rather stay inside and watch MTV and whatever. And now those are just such treasure times to be out there and just to be inspired by the beauty of that land. As everybody else has said, it's just something otherworldly.
Eileen?
I got to echo about the natural landscape. I mean, just growing up very rurally in the Eastern Panhandle and just being out in the woods all day or coming back home and working in my mom's garden with her. And just that connection like to the natural world and spending so many summer days in creeks and the Potomac River and living in town in Shepherdstown and walking down to the river all the time and just watching it change over across seasons and across, my lifetime. Something else too, I'd be remiss to say that some of my fondest memories are with people here in this room tonight. One of my oldest friends is on the panel. Hi, Bryan. And so many of my memories are of making art with people in this panel and doing like incredible, unexpected theater in West Virginia, of all places. So I'm incredibly grateful for the art opportunities that I had, like going to governor's school as a teenager, governor's school for the arts and the Governor's Honors Academy, which were summer intensives that are hosted at a rotating series of West Virginia colleges and university. And they offer the, kids that are performing well in school. I think it was like 3 weeks of like pre-college classes. And that was my first exposure to college culture. That was my first exposure to the idea that I could go to college and that I could be an artist for a living, and get to do that now because of those governor's school programs. So I'm giving you a lot here. There's a lot that I'm very fond of. I had a really wonderful childhood and life in West Virginia and Appalachia specifically. And I don't really have bitterness towards the place, but towards the policies that prevent me from having a life there now.
Thanks so much to all of you for that. And apparently, I'm a terrible Appalachian because I would hide in the house as a kid because I was terrified of mosquitoes. So now you all know one of my weird childhood issues. This next question, we'll start with Matt and then Torli and Bryan, Eileen, and Jonathan. But if someone who really sort of knows nothing about our region comes up to you and says, just tell me one great thing about Appalachia, what would you tell them?
Yeah, I think I would start with it's just so much bigger than you think. And I mean that in size and concept. I mean, size, it's an expansive region that it depends on which definition, right? There's like 10,000 different ways that you can define what the borders are always a little stupid. But there's a lot of people. And there's a broad swath of people, a lot of diversity, and that gets to that expansiveness. And so part of like everything we just talked about is part of the great thing. And at the same time, it's all that romantic, absolutely true, except for Leigh, joy of being outside when you're a kid. It's also very normal, right? Like it's MTV. It's right, as Bryan was saying, it was just like going to band. And so all of the people on this panel in different ways, I think, are excluded from the definition people bring to Appalachia if they don't know anything about it. And we're so much bigger than those pre-existing definitions. And that's what I want them to understand, is that people shouldn't have to be made to leave, but they do because people think we're made to be small.
Torli?
Yeah, my answer to this one was our culture and our people, and like not as it's presented in stereotype. Like I'm talking about, what I found to be beautiful is like the different expressions of music and art and church going. If you're religious, the food that's here, just all of that, all encompassing everything for everybody here, and yeah, that and going back to the last point, sort of how the land is always, whether it's explicit or it's subtle, the land has shaped everybody in some way that lives here.
Bryan?
Going back to there being former professors, I see that Rachel Meads is here, and she was my Appalachian culture professor, so I feel tense. But what stands out to me, and maybe this is just like the inner romantic in me, but some of John Brown's last words, as he was looking out on the Shenandoah Valley, basically, is, "This is a beautiful country." And I think that when I reflect on Appalachia, it is so filled with a beauty that you can't find anywhere else. And it is because of the unique mixture of people and history and culture and music and storytelling that is preserved in a way that I don't think you find anywhere else, at least in the United States. That's my digest.
Eileen?
Gosh, I have to say the people, which I basically said in my last answer, but that's where all of my people are. That really is my home, my emotional home, my family, my professors, the schools that shaped me, my church, all of that still remains in Shepherdstown. And so when people ask what's the best thing about Appalachia, I'm going to say that my people there and the communities that keep trying and don't give up and don't leave. Which is not to say that leaving is giving up. I'm sure many of us on this panel feel heartache about that all the time. And I still go as often as I can, and I will still fight to live there sometimes. And my wife and I tried so hard to live there again, or for her first time. She's from California. But I love, what I love so most about Appalachia is the people that don't give up on it. And that's probably what I'd boast about for home.
Jonathan?
Yeah, I think you guys nailed all of it. It's definitely also the people for me. A little anecdote. I told you I live in Brooklyn now. I have found all West Virginians in my neighborhood. We are all friends with each other. So the notion that home extends long and far for many Appalachians. There's a connective tissue. Even though we are different, we are varied. We are many, but we share something, a connection that does span state lines that we can't forget. I'd like to also push off of, I think, what Eileen was saying a little bit, and say I think the resiliency of the people to stay, to fight to make the place the best version it can be, to stay to make it the home we all want it to be, that we know it is already. And so every time I go back home and I visit Appalachia, I see the people on the ground and I see the amazing things they're doing. And I know that we're going to be in good hands. We have to fight for it, but there are people on the ground working to make sure that their neighbors are going to be okay. And that's Appalachia for me.
Thanks so much to all of you for that. And the next question will start with Torli. And so often a stereotype is affixed to Appalachia that only straight white Christians are welcome or can thrive in this region. Do you believe that? And if you don't believe it, how can we change that perception? Or if you do believe it and think that, that's the way it is, how can we change that underlying issue?
So I don't think that's the case because I mean anecdotally I'm a living counterexample to that. So but I mean apart from that, there are pockets in Appalachia where you have people of different faiths, whether it's Hindu, Judaism, Islam, that they exist. West Virginia has its own, like Eileen was talking about, its own niche queer spaces that are all in these disparate pockets, but people are thriving and living and maintaining a life here. Another just glaring example that I think speaks against that is like Pittsburgh is a place. Pittsburgh exists in Appalachia. I don't know if people like ever really think about that. It's just like how all those pockets coexist there. And that's just what I can give from living in central Appalachia. There's a really great essay in Appalachian Reckoning, which is this collection that is against hillbilly elegy. It's edited by Anthony Harkins and Meredith McCarroll. There's an essay in there by William from Kentucky, and it's called Black Hillbillies Have No Time for Elegies. And towards the middle and end of that essay, he just gives this litany of Black people from Kentucky that have been successful in their life. I'm going to throw a whole bunch of other books in the chat from other poets and people that have lives elsewhere or somehow connected to Appalachia that also speak against this. But my answer to that is a resounding no.
Bryan?
Can people outside of the straight white male dynamic thrive? Absolutely. I mean, it's testament to all of the names that can pop into our head. I think, can they thrive as easily as they should be able to? I don't know. That's not necessarily the question here, but I think that there could be greater respect given to the diversity of voices within Appalachia. I remember in recommendations of things, I'm going to toss out A Constant Mourning by Bell Hooks. It's a short article where she talks about the preclusion of the Black identity from Appalachia, that within even the region itself, we exclude people who don't fit our preconceived conceptions of this. That's our own identity. So I think within that, I think that it's a testament to the beauty of the people in Appalachia that are not in that dynamic, who succeed and grow and thrive despite there being some very real obstacles to whatever their demographics that differ from that zeitgeist are. But how do we change that? I think again is just continuing to elevate the voices that challenge as much as you can. For everybody that reads Hillbilly Elegy, give them 5 different voices to read. We have the Pulitzer Prize winning book this year, Demon Copperhead, about life in Appalachia. I think is a great move forward. So that's my piece.
Eileen?
I think the stereotypes exist because of the monolith of the storytelling of the region. And I'm sure that somebody mentioned this earlier, but often the people telling the story about our region aren't local, didn't grow up there, and have something to profit and gain in the storytelling of our region. So yeah, and if how I can speak to who can thrive and who can't, uh, I found it very hard. I found it very hard to live in even a progressive small college town. So I feel testament to and I am white and I am Christian and I'm straight passing. And I found it like one of the most challenging years of my life to move back after having newfound freedoms of living on the West Coast with just things like having access to healthcare and having things like dental care for like the first time in a really long time, and then coming back to West Virginia and even working as a professor, even with that elevated, not with a cash in hand job, but with a career. And I think my wife and I would both say it was one of the most challenging years of our life. So how can we change it? I think it goes back to a fundamental lack of resource, an issue of economy. Cost of living crisis in Appalachia is insane. Our tiny apartment costs the equivalent of something in LA. That's wild. So if the young, smart people can't afford to live in these towns that are already these beacons of progressive life, how can we support the change that we want to be? So I think that we have so much work to do. And sometimes I wonder if I'm up to the task of it.
Jonathan?
Yeah, this is a really great question. I'm going to reference personal experience, which, growing up, I was someone who was told by my family that I was not welcome in West Virginia because I was gay, and I was told to leave and never come back. That was the ultimatum I was given by my family. So that is very real. That's a real thing. Where I've come now, 15 years later, 20 years later, as things have changed a lot, in many ways, I keep coming back to this idea of visibility. We have always been here, people who are non-white, people who are of a different sexual orientation, people who have different religions. We have always been here. Dominant narratives work to erase us, to make us disappear, and it's a vicious cycle. So the first thing that we need to do is recognize that we exist. People need to notice people who fit outside of that norm, so-called norm. People need to tell our stories, and people need to be willing to hear our stories, right? That's part of it. And I think we're all here because we're trying to convey those stories. That's part of what this panel is about. The other thing I think about a lot is that I'm training myself to do as somebody who doesn't live there anymore, is to listen to the voices on the ground, because there are really good people. Every time I go home, I see grassroots organizations fighting the really, really good fight on the ground to make these places safe for all of us. And they're succeeding in many ways. So a lot of problems are fixed by listening to the people who live there, who exist there, who know what it means to be on the ground. And so, as somebody who is coming here from outside of the state, having been born and raised there, I remind myself to listen to the people who live there today, and to know to watch what they're doing and learn from their experiences, because what I see on the ground is a lot of progress and a lot of change since I lived there. And it's because those people fought to make their home the home they wanted it to be. So visibility and listening to the people who are really fighting for this kind of change.
Matt?
Yeah, when you're number 5 on the panel, you're just like, yeah, that was it. You guys are brilliant, and I have nothing else to add. No, I do. I always do. I'll talk for hours about anything. I think all of that, but then I want to acknowledge that I hope it's okay if I cuss now and again. But the shitheads who claim Appalachia win a lot. and I'm thinking politically, and I'm thinking socially. And I know there was somebody on the call here who had to leave a job teaching because she was standing up for the kids who were being told that they were evil, the LGBTQ community there, by a member of the school board. And it is exhausting work for somebody to do that in this region. And so we have to lift up the voices, but we also need to bring the support to people so that they can see that the allies are nearby. And so we can flood the zone. So that now this is like a non-practical, practical solution. It's dirt cheap up here in northwestern Pennsylvania. And I know it varies depending on where you are in the region, but you can buy a house up here for under $100,000. And right, Eileen's like, so you say. The mountains are a little small up here once you get up the north, but you can abide. But there have been a couple of instances, like with Detroit, but also there's a town, Oil City, not too far from here, that are actually had some success luring young artists in with like dirt cheap houses. And I think we need more practical moves like that to lure and maintain young artists and young thinkers and young professionals to be able to invest in a home here, which also changes the politics really quickly. And that's part of why the shitheads keep winning, is they keep making it so hard for people to stick around that the votes leave too. But if we can take advantage of the affordability crisis elsewhere in the country and help young folks, young progressive folks see how beautiful the landscape is, that they can stay at home or they can make a new home here, we have a chance to actually change the politics. And that's going to give that relief that we need so that people don't have to leave and they don't feel threatened on a daily basis.
I was doing some research for another project, and to substantiate Eileen's point earlier, the median house price in Jefferson County, which is where Shepherdstown is now approximately $400,000. So, absolutely where you agree with you, where you're saying, they're very affordable areas, but then there's somewhere, as Eileen said, young people are being priced out. So I want to ask the next to last question, sort of, that was prepared. And then we'll have, I think, a few minutes to open it up to some folks on the call. And this is perhaps the big one. And we'll start with Bryan, and again, go in alphabetical order of first name. But what is your personal direct response to J.D. Vance and all the stuff coming out of his mouth? Recently, historically, forever, etc. Anything about couches? Bryan, kick us off.
Keep our name out of your damn mouth, I think, is the most direct I would say to him. I think that J.D. Vance is the absolute epitome of the worst political commoditization of our region. I read Hillbilly Elegy. I have followed this sham of a human being as he has now asked to sit in the second highest seat of power in our country. He has no regard or understanding for our people. And I go back to the idea that the hubris of him to feel that he could pronounce an elegy for this region. Appalachia and hillbillies are very much alive. And I think panels like this show that keep it to the couch, JD. That's all I'll say.
Eileen.
Oh man, JD Vance is a classic caricature of a grifter. It's nothing new to the region. We're talking about extractive culture. What a way to, capitalize on stereotype and narrative and to tell people, especially who aren't from the region, to affirm their screwed up beliefs about a region. I think he's nothing special to the culture in terms of what he's doing socially now. I just fear the momentum behind such a caricature of a person. The title of his book, which I was shocked to see such a massive display of Hillbilly Elegy in my local Barnes and Noble, as like a must-read nonfiction pick. And I had to resist the like teenage rebellious urge to like, pick it up and move it to the fiction section or whatever angsty goth mall kids do. So yeah, JD Vance, I have no kind words to say.
Jonathan.
Yeah, whew, what to say to JD Vance? You know, on a serious note, the first thing you notice when you read his book is he calls us lazy, right? He calls us lazy. And I would love to see him tell that to people to their faces, to people like my dad, who is a construction worker who worked for 45 years of his life and without health insurance because he didn't have health insurance through his company until the day he literally fell in a ditch and couldn't work anymore, right? I would love to talk to JD Vance about people like my father. I would love also to tell JD Vance, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry for him for what he went through with his family. I understand it hurt him. I understand that he came from a tough situation growing up. And as someone who's gone through traumatic experiences, I also know that we tend to blur the lines and associate the whole place with our trauma, right? We tend to start writing off regions, people, communities. It's taken me a long time as an adult to heal from my own trauma and to recognize that I stopped being able to see the people around me, that I stopped being able to see the world I came from. There's this thing that I always tell anyone: when you experience a traumatic event, a place freezes in time to when that event happens. So when I experienced trauma with my family, Elkins, West Virginia froze to the year 2004, and it stopped changing in time. And then as I healed and I grew up, I came back and I began to see that this place was a living, thriving, evolving town, right? A living, thriving, evolving region. So I hope that JD Vance someday can heal from his own trauma and begin to see our place, our home, our region as a multifaceted place that isn't a single story, that is more than one bad experience, more than his history that he went through. So, I do feel for him, and maybe one day he'll start being able to see the broad spectrum of what this place really is.
Matt.
Yeah, Jonathan was really high-minded, and I wanted to be petty. So, well, I'll go to petty, and then I'll come back to that. Yeah, so I actually love that the weird thing has happened, and that the couch joke is happening, and that the Democratic Party writ large has decided that the best way to combat this is to call it as like, you're just weird, man. You're just doing weird stuff. Because part of what gives power to it's a bad memoir. I'm interrupting myself to say that it's a bad memoir because a memoir is supposed to experience a life, reflect on it, and draw conclusions. And instead, he came with a point to make, which is, I want to be powerful and hillbillies are lazy. And then he fit his story into that. So he deserves ridicule. And I think that it's important for us in some ways to recognize, I said a little bit earlier, did I? Maybe I did. It might have been in my mind. Stories win elections. Policy never does. Everybody says that they vote for policy, but they don't. They vote for the story that they think makes them succeed in some ways. And so what I want to say to him is, I am sorry for you. You have a small life and you're trying to make other people small. And in a compassionate way, this may sound like a joke, but I don't mean it. Like, his original D was Donald. He was born, that middle name was Donald, and that was his first father who left. And now he's got a new dad figure who he's running for, right? Like, I think we can see narratively, at least if I'm writing the novel, it's probably a bad novel, but that's the character motivation. And so we need to ridicule it out. We need to embrace talking about the stories that speak against that, and make an argument for how stories function, and that we refuse to live somebody else's couch dreams.
Torli, last word to you.
So this is gonna take me a minute. I'm wanting to start out with the second part of that, which is more like his take on the region, right? Everybody that I graduated with, that graduated in classes before mine and after mine in Webster County, show that Vance is not the anomaly that he thinks he is. He's not some prism to take the region through. Is like making it. People haven't made it to that extent, but people were, like Bryan said, alive and well and making a life for themselves. And that's in one county, in one state, in the entirety of this region that I can speak to. That's nothing to say of everywhere else within this region that could testify to something wider. The JD himself, I hate that man like Kendrick Lamar hates Drake. I'm not one to take away anything from his achievements, but they're kind of this mask, and they turned him into this funhouse mirror villain, which is a term that I owe to a friend of mine who lives out in Virginia. A funhouse mirror villain is someone who you can see where they would have went if they would have wound up on the right path. And that's what I got whenever I read his book. Is like, if he would have wound up in a different crowd of people like advising him or in his cohort, and maybe wouldn't have went to a law school that was like so cutthroat, he may have wound up at a place where, yes, he still writes this very poor elegy in quotes, because it doesn't pay any respect to what an elegy is in its form. He would have wound up in this place, but I think there would have been a space to correct him, and he would have been able to recognize what his own education did for him, and then come back here and be an advocate for that same type of education for other people. And at one point in a TED talk that he gave that was about what he called America's forgotten working class, there was this veneer that he still seemed like he was wanting to do that. But then you look back at that and you look where he's at today, and you've seen that he's only continued to become, as people said, more weird in a way, has also made him more, in a way, pitiable, like John and Matt have alluded to, in that he only wants power for himself and he can't see anything beyond that. And it's gotten to the point where he's in this place of visceral misogyny. He's in bed with a xenophobic Christian nationalism that has to be opposed and voted against. And I think coming down to like even the most recent, just pointing back to where we were at in July with the Republican National Convention, right? He's willing to have his wife get up there in front of sides from a crowd saying, let's say mass deportation now, no, in the background. He shares a faith in Catholicism with people that, a lot of people who come in that are Hispanic have Catholicism as their faith. They take the same Eucharist that he takes. They follow the same liturgy that he follows, and he still can't see them as human beings. And so to me, where I feel at, like in conclusion with this man, is if you're willing to put your wife through that, expose your kids to that kind of hate, and you can't see a common faith as being able to unite you with your fellow human being, where is he at but his soul turning more and more in on itself and becoming more and more damnable unless somebody or something wakes him up? That's where I'm left at with this man, and that's why I have nothing but hatred for him. I hope that something or someone does wake him up, but that's where I'm at.
Thanks for that. So I want to open it up to questions in just a moment, but first, just to give her plenty of warning, Professor Meads, if you are willing, after this last little piece from our panelists, Could you do just a short plug for the upcoming Appalachian Heritage Festival in Shepherdstown? I don't see Dr. Bankhurst. Was hoping you would be able to just give us like a excellent, like 15-second. So I do want to invite people to submit a question in the chat if you could. That might be the most orderly way to do it, and we'll try to get to a couple of them. And while folks are doing that, we'll just go in reverse. So Torli, I'll start with you. You already kind of mentioned it, but you've got a book coming out shortly. When is it due out? And how can people, or what can people do now to support that? Are pre-orders important? Anything like that?
So my book is coming out October the 1st from Pulley Press. The title is Requiem for a Redbird. You can find details on it on pulleypress.com. I'll throw that in the chat. But as far as there being pre-order links, all of that's still in process.
Got it. And any other upcoming things, creative stuff that you're working on that folks can do to support your efforts?
Not at the time. I have other creative things that I'm working on, some essays and a story and whatnot, but all of that's just kind of in the background. But thank you.
Got it. Sure. And Eileen, you have a book coming out.
Yes, I do. I believe next October. We haven't set an exact date yet, but October, November 2025. My book will be coming out from University Press of Kentucky. It's called Carrying the Bones, Rituals for a Dying World. And it's a nonfiction title that explores grief and death culture and rituals in the West, particularly during the pandemic era. And I look at the last 5-6 years of mass death and how myself, my community, and others have reacted to displacing the American funeral from in person to on Zoom and things like that. So no pre-orders or anything like that yet. I am still dotting the T's, crossing the I's. And yeah, but if you take a look at what University Press of Kentucky's got, there will probably be a pre-order link sometime in the next year. So thanks.
And not to further put you on the spot, but you will be in Shepherdstown in September supporting someone for their appearance at the Shepherdstown Book Festival. Do you want to offer that special person a little plug?
I would love to, who is in the chat, but attending as an audience member. My wife's third poetry collection is coming out through Alice James Press at the end of August. So she's going to have some events at the Shepherdstown Book Festival. I don't know what dates. That's a great question for Leigh. I think it's the September 20th to 22nd. But her new book called I Don't Want to Be Understood through Alice James Press, is coming out, I think, August 27th. And if you happen to be in the Bay Area, particularly San Francisco, we're having a launch on Tuesday next week. I'll put
Matt, you're going to be somewhere special on September 20th, 21st, and 22nd, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm going to be at the Shepherdstown Book Festival, which I'm really excited by. And I'll be talking about reading from a book that just came out last week. I Hate It Here, Please Vote for Me, Essays on Rural Political Decay. It's a collection of essays / memoir about losing badly. The big plug is the first moment I decided to run was when the incumbent, who still is our rep, said that he didn't think the state of Pennsylvania should give financial aid to any students who study poetry or any other pre-Walmart major. And then people got mad, so he apologized to Walmart and continued, and he has continued to go after poets. We just got a new poet laureate, first time ever, I guess, Pennsylvania had a poet laureate, and he tried to block it in the state house. So it's really all about being from a place you love deeply that doesn't love the kind of politics you have, and how poetry might be our way out of that. I'll also be at Taylor Books in Charleston on October 12th. I think it's 12th, which is a Saturday. And is it the 16th of August? I'll be close to Shepherdstown. I'll be at Wordplay. And so The name of the town is escaping me, Lee. What's word? It's yeah,
Gordonsville.
Wardensville. Yeah. So yeah, that's what's going on in my neck of the woods right now.
That's great. And your new book is WVU Press, right?
Yes.
Okay, had to get that plug in.
Yes, absolutely.
Bryan, do you want to two things? Tell us about what you did at a particular festival, which is just amazing to have someone on the panel who did it. And then also, just as a plug, tell everyone why Hardy County and Wardensville are really important to you and your family between now and November, and forevermore, but specifically between now and November.
What a great leading question, Lee. I appreciate that. Last year I did have the wild and wonderful opportunity to take a one-man show that I wrote that includes original music and storytelling to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival in Edinburgh, Scotland. I since got the chance to perform it at Shepherd University last year, and it had its Los Angeles premiere in January. There is a recording of that on YouTube from the Shepherd performance, at least. But I'm still kind of workshopping that, seeing if I want to take that to the next level. Also have a few other creative projects deliberating on. But in terms of Hardy County, any and all Democrats and Democrat supporters, my brother Harley Warren Staggers III is running for prosecuting attorney, Hardy County. He is the only candidate with any experience remotely preparing him for that position. He has a ton of support already, but as we know, running as a Democrat in any West Virginia county is up against putting you up against some obstacles. So please check out. You can find Harley Warren Staggers for prosecuting attorney on Facebook. Got a bunch of events coming up. Would love to have any and all of your voices contributing to some Democratic success come November.
And Jonathan, you have been touring with your new book, right?
Yes, I just wrapped up a book tour actually, so you all missed me. My last event was with our very own Jane Ann Phillips, who just won the Pulitzer Prize. So West Virginia's own. She graciously had me on stage in Boston. So I'm very proud of our state. Two Appalachian Pulitzer Prizes in a row between Barbara Kingsolver and Jane Ann Phillips. So we're kind of on a roll right now. Yeah. So my newest book, No Son of Mine, a memoir, just came out in April from University Press of Kentucky. So you can find that online at bookstores. And my old book, The Rope Swing, is out there too. It's a short story collection from WVU Press. And yeah, so thanks for letting me mention those, and it's just a pleasure.
Absolutely. And Professor Meads, did you want to do I know you put something in the chat, but did you want to do a bit of a promo for the Appalachian Festival? I may have you muted or something. You would think I would know how to use Zoom after 4 years.
It is
There we go.
totally okay. Can you hear me okay, Lee?
Yep.
All right. Thank you so much for doing this panel. Y'all did a great job. I just want to make two plugs. Plug number one is for the Appalachian Writer in Residence program, which happens to be conveniently located right beside the Shepherdstown Book Festival. So I think I dropped in the chat a link to the residency, and this year we're featuring Mark Harshman, the West Virginia Poet Laureate, and he also does other writing as well, plus children's books, plus he's just a great guy. So he is our feature. He's part of the West Virginia One Book, One Read program sponsored by the library system. And the West Virginia Humanities Council is also supporting that event. So all of the events are free. They are here at Shepherd. everyone should feel free to take advantage of it. I also wanted to make a shameless plug because sometimes I think to myself, if I could have had JD Vance as a student, if I just could have had my chance to like talk to him and help him sort of read the things and frame the things and ask really critical questions, I feel like we change hearts and minds that way. And so I really appreciated the kindness with which, Jonathan, you spoke with such generosity and spirit. I think I'd like to make a plug to remind you that Shepherd University has an Appalachian Studies and Communities program. And these programs have been embattled around the region as enrollment dips and things are struggling. It's really important that we are doing this work and that we're talking about these things. And I'm so very proud of all of our students who have come through this program. Amazing change makers and thinkers, but just being the average student taking this because, well, I don't know, I have to fulfill a box that's sociology of some sort. So I think I'll take Appalachian culture, or I have to have an arts bucket. So let's take Appalachian ethnomusicology and figure out what that's about. These programs and the courses really do help change people's perspectives. And I've seen it firsthand. It's just like the most empowering work ever. But I so feel for what these panelists are talking about. Like, we're all fighters. Clearly, everybody's a fighter here. But we also feel the sense of frustration and exhaustion, I think, and otherness, where we've been shoved sort of like, well, no, you don't belong here. And yes, 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 we do belong here. And this is the place that made us and shaped us. If you want to learn more about Appalachian Studies, check out some of the courses through the Appalachian Studies program, and encourage other people to explore it. Because even if you're just reading, the reading list that was put in the chat today is great. So much good stuff there, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff. Like, we hit hard on a lot of literary things, but man, there's so much like sociology and political organizing and, just general roots of social justice and civil rights movement that you can learn. I'm going to be quiet now.
Thanks so much for that, Professor Meads. And I can't say enough great things about the Appalachian Studies program. I mean, they've had just amazing writers like Barbara Kingsolver, Frank X. Walker, Wiley Cash, Charles Frazier, Nikki Giovanni, on and on and on, Henry Louis Gates. It's just amazing. So I hope everyone does take a look at that, because a lot of the programs are either filmed or broadcast. So even if you can't make it to Shepherd, there are opportunities to view some of the things that have gone on. So one of the questions...
I forgot something.
Sure.
Can I add one more thing?
Sure.
I wanted to also mention that Shepherdstown, for the first time, will be hosting the West Virginia, or not the West Virginia, the Appalachian Queer Film Festival. It is the only one of its kind, and it's all arts, LGBTQ plus filmmakers making work that deals with the LGBTQ experience. That is going to be the last weekend of September. So there'll be the Shepherdstown Book Festival. And then after that, the following weekend is this, the Appalachian Queer Film Festival. So I'll try to put that in the chat as well. But that's really important. And I really appreciated what the panelists had to say tonight about queer identities and feeling insider, outsider, excluded, not included. Because that's something that I feel like is more and more becoming like, so I feel like that movement is changing. I think that we are seeing a push to try and shove people out of the state through its policies, but I see more and more people grassroots organizing to resist and to try to build community was talking about, because that's really crucial. And I feel so strongly about that for my own children and their safety and their habitat that they're going to be living in the future. And just as another note of hope, the ACLU of West Virginia is sponsoring the Appalachian Queer Youth Summit in the state this week, starting next week on Wednesday. So Wednesday through Sunday, kids from all over West Virginia who've applied, their parents have, signed them up or they've signed themselves up for young people from ages 15 to 19 are welcome together for a week of summer camp with all queer identifying kids who get to have that sense of community. And they're being taught by elders who are all LGBTQ as well, and who really have been inspiring these young people. So I will put in some info about that. But if you want something cool that's happening to sort of support queer youth in the state, that's something cool.
And there's a rumor that the film festival may also be tabling at the Shepherdstown Book Festival. So if you come to the festival, you can get information about the film festival the next week. So one of our questions is from a classroom teacher, 26 years, teaching high school English, who also happens to be running for state senate, Christy Cardwell. So she says, feeling all kinds of emotions about this discussion. I'll never forget that strike, mostly because we are seeing the end run around our wishes come to fruition with the Hope Scholarships. How can we help all of our kids when we strip funding from their schools? So we'll probably have time for maybe 2 more questions after this. So I would just say any of the 5 panelists who want to respond to this, just feel free to sort of jump in. If one of you or more of you, doesn't choose to respond, that's fine too. But if we could keep our responses kind of brief. So again, how can we help all of our kids when we're stripping funding from the public school system?
Listen, I don't have any solutions, but I just want to say that Hope Scholarship was the only way that I got to college. There was no plan for me to get to college outside of like aggressively applying for scholarships and just busting my ass in school and getting into so much debt, even with the Hope Scholarship. So if we're taking the funds with the limited resources that are already in place, and the Hope Scholarship was also a small amount of money when I was in school, I think it was like $4,000 a semester, which, like, living on the West Coast now and looking at the tuition for the average even community college around here, I'm like $4,000. But yeah, how can we expect for the students to succeed if we're not giving them resources? It's like we keep being surprised about like what happens when we take things away. So, I mean, that is in the hands of our lawmakers. I don't know what we can do but bear witness to this. Yes, somebody said the Promise Scholarship. Yes, okay, sorry. Thank you for that.
The Hope Scholarship, and it's easy because they both sound great, but one of them isn't. The Hope Scholarship basically gives people, it's like a school voucher in some ways. It gives them money to homeschool their children or to send them to a alternative educational place. And Christy knows the nuances much better than I. But so again, particularly just taking money away from the public school system. Matt, as a former candidate, although in a different state, did you want to throw something in about that?
Yeah, I'm just quickly, I think the framing of that question is the question that political candidates need to ask in exactly that way. How can we expect blah, blah, blah. And then maybe adding the extra frame of how much money goes to big oil companies and subsidies, because we never see that. Or there's really a great statistic about the actual cost of subsidies for fossil fuels, because they don't have to pay for their environmental cleanup. We pay for the environmental cleanup. And so that's the kind of messaging that needs to come out in campaigns, is that we're taking money away from our kids so they can't succeed. And we're giving that money to massive corporations that are making gobs of money and leaving behind cancer and global climate change. And I just think we have to be aggressive about sending that message. And that's how running for office can help change that story.
Corley, Bryan, or Jonathan, do either of you want to add anything to that?
I think take
Okay. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
expose just as a teaching artist, I think expose the kids in our communities, in your communities, as much as you can to the richness of the culture. Take them out to learn and grow with the richness of what is available outside of the schools. It's unfortunate how politicized education is, particularly in West Virginia. But I think the more that we can grow outside of that, the more that we can find those solutions kind of in the roundabout way to the system.
You could bring those students, those children, to the Shepherdstown Book Festival.
Exactly.
So a question from Roz, who is over in Berkeley County. What policies matter the most to our folks, would you say? Is it healthcare, Social Security, climate change, what have you? What's sort of the number one political policy right now in Appalachia that you believe Appalachians are care about?
I'll jump in for this one. I feel very strongly, all of them, but I feel very strongly that education is one of the most important things because when we educate our students and we give them a fair chance, they can see through the ruse of people like JD Vance. And if we have any hope for the future to change these policies, we need to give kids a chance to think and to learn how to think. I used to teach a very short chapter of Hillbilly Elegy against two rebuttals to it to inner city students in Newark, New Jersey, and it took them all of 10 minutes to read the piece and the responses and see right through it and say, "Hey, I can see what he's doing. He's attributing the same story to everybody. That's not who we are." And they knew that. Because they've been given the skills to think for themselves. If we do the same for our children, they will be able to see right through these policies. But I also want to make a shout out for healthcare because if our bodies are broken, if we don't have functioning bodies, we don't have preventative care, we're not going to make it. We're not going to make it. So I just, as somebody who's grown up on the precipice of healthcare, who's seen the devastating effects, and dental care, throw that out there because that matters for Appalachians also. We're not going to have a fighting chance in the world. So yeah, that's my short of it.
I want to chime in on healthcare for a second too. That I think it's so fundamental because one of the binds you get in is sometimes you have to take a job you know is bad for you and bad for your community because it has healthcare. And so if we could actually find a way to provide the healthcare for people and educate them, so both, but if we could free people from the shackle of employer-sponsored healthcare, they could actually have the agency to make different choices. And it's no mystery to me why we don't have those choices. It favors the large companies because they can keep you in that job providing money for them. And so I think that would be an absolute game changer for small communities. Not easy to achieve, but a game changer.
Anyone else want to weigh in on that? Okay. So this will probably be our last question. Just because I want to honor the panelists' time. They've been with us for about an hour and a half now, and honor the time of all of you who are joining. So this question is from Samuel Vance. Given the overall progressive and humble history of Appalachia, do any of you feel sorrow to see its people being constantly seduced by extreme conservatism?
Yes.
I was going to say I was about to call on someone.
I think it is very difficult to wrestle with knowing people that I grew up with. I know their hearts, I know their minds. Be co-opted by a false idol, I think is how it's framed in my mind, that we can drift so far away from each other in how we even just acknowledge the facts of a problem before we can work to solve them together. And so that's what I find to be so dangerous, maybe particularly in Appalachia, where for the entirety of its modern history, at least in the American capitalist era, we are constantly kept insulated, going back to the idea of like not even having internet still in some places. And I find it troublesome that the penchant for storytelling specifically has been used to just create a narrative of an otherization of particular types of people, that I think goes against the core of who we are as a welcoming people, as a community-based people.
Bryan, can I put in, I apologize, I'm gonna put you on the spot just a little bit because I want to see if we can sort of pull something out of what you said. So you come from a political family, right? Your dad was in politics, your grandfather was in politics, and I don't quite know how the years line up given your, relative youth, but the relative youth, your youth, apologies. But can you address at all sort of like the shift? Like, are there people who you remember seeing in your hometown who just thought, the public service of your family was just amazing, and now like post 2016 they just think that anyone with a D after their name is the devil? I mean, have you witnessed any of that?
Yes, I think growing up, my grandfather was in Congress for 32 years, and my father for 10 years, representing, for the most part, the 4th district no longer exists. And what I remember distinctly about being a child in Kaiser is, when people would find out my last name, they all had some story about how my grandfather had helped them out in some way. If that was, a story of him helping a guy whose car was broken down, to finding people jobs, to all kinds of assistance, and that was the priority, and the political kind of mantra that was instilled with me about what a politician should have at the center of their job was constituent service. And I think that we've lost that. Now the representative for the 2nd district, Alex Mooney, is a Maryland carpetbagger who couldn't care less about the people of West Virginia and merely is riding investment from outside sources to exploit the narrative that's been crafted. So that's where I see the disconnect, is that it's become so less about how to serve the people and more how to serve the narrative from the financial powers of the two main parties.
And I just want to continue this line a little bit with Eileen or Matt or Torli or Jonathan, because I see this a lot being involved in politics. I mean, do the 4 of you or any of you encounter, you meet a very nice person at some sort of event and they seem like, they're just wonderful and they're great. And, this is like someone who you could work with on a project or who's become a friend or something of that nature. And then somehow it shifts to politics or it shifts to something that is politically adjacent. And you share the fact that maybe you aren't, a Donald Trump supporter or a Jim Justice or what have you. And just immediately the atmosphere just shifts uncontrollably. Anything that either any of the 4 of you can touch on with regard to that? And if not, you're very lucky.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's maddening in that I'm thinking of several moments. One was when I was a candidate and I was having a conversation at a Farm Bureau meeting, and we were talking about great stuff about growing up on farms, et cetera, et cetera. Then as soon as she found out that I was the Democratic candidate, she laughed and said, "Well, good luck." And at least she didn't call me the devil or a demon rat. I got a lot of that. But I don't have a solution. I mean, it breaks my heart. I actually come from a Republican family. I describe them as Eisenhower Republicans, like a different old school version that seemed reasonable. Even if I wouldn't agree with the politics, there still wasn't that immediate demonization. So I have no solution. But what's so disorienting about it is that you can be having that conversation, and you can be having that conversation actually about policies, and you're agreeing until the party affiliation comes out. And then, I was accused of being in Nancy Pelosi's pocket, which why would Nancy Pelosi care about a tiny state house district in northwestern Pennsylvania? So, yeah, I think I'm just validating the comment. I have no solution. It's endlessly frustrating. And I think Brian's right. Like the idea of service of the community versus service of the self, that's everything.
And I should back up for just 1 second and say that I'm sure there are instances where people on the left side of the spectrum do the same thing. I don't want to make it sound like, only people who are conservative are doing that. But given the fact that parts of Appalachia have shifted so quickly, and my own experience door knocking and, I don't know. I think I'm a little scary looking, I guess, to people. So I think that they don't shout their worst stuff at me yet. Anyway, it's a long season. Did Eileen or Torli or Jonathan, did any of you want to have a last word on that question or point?
Yeah, I'll just jump in to echo off of those last comments. I've gone through this with my own family and friends, where people have suddenly express strong opinions, as you're saying, and it can shut down conversation. One thing that I've noticed in talking with my family and friends is on a policy level, just like you were saying, Matt, if you talk about what somebody actually wants, it turns out we're not that far in disagreement on most things. I don't have a solution. I mean, I sat down, I remember having a conversation with my mother saying, "You want healthcare, right?" And she goes, "Yeah." And she goes, "But they're going to take away our guns." And I said, wait. Again, I didn't win that argument. I think she voted for the person who is not going to take away her guns. But the comment I'm making is that I think we are much closer. And so what we're doing right now, which is just storytelling and trying to talk to each other, when we can, in spaces where we're not going to shout each other down, that's helpful. That's not always possible with extreme conservatism. Also, I know that's not possible all the time, but I guess like just keep telling these stories, right? Because if everybody hears about how someone is affected by a policy when they understand that there's a real body attached to it, right? There's a real human body, a real education, a real chance at a job, a real down payment on a house. These kinds of things really do bring us closer together because we all pretty much want the same things, which is a fair shake in life and a chance to exist, right? Anyways, thank you all. You're so eloquent.
Yeah, I guess I would add on to that. I'd had a conversation with Doug Van Gundy, who was my poetry mentor one time. We were talking about something adjacent to this with how a lot of people that you meet, we were talking about Republicans specifically just because of the bent and also this question dealing with conservatism. A lot of everyday people that you meet that are aligned with that party, like Jonathan and other people have echoed, like you can talk and come to a reasonable place of like where you're not too far apart. Problem is, those aren't the people that are running for office. The people that are running for office are the ones that are more towards the narrative of what Matt was pointing out and then what Brian was pointing out in terms of you had a really good term for it in false idol, because I also don't want to overlook how and co-option, because I don't want to overlook how religion has been sadly entwined in all of that, and then that becoming its own sort of spiral, and how you get into instances like you're talking about, Matt, of demonization. So all of that's sort of entwined. But I wanted to bring that up of a lot of people who are just in the party are just normal people, but they're not the people that are running for office.
Eileen, did you want to have the last word on that?
Yeah, I'll weigh in. For my part, okay, also my husky, I have a very young husky puppy and she's gonna keep jumping on the table because it's dinner time. So if you see me swatting away, this is my dog Maya, who is trying to be a part of the panel tonight. For my part, I feel like so much of just like my existence as a queer person is like trying to justify my existence, and especially in regions like Appalachia. And so for me, I felt like most conversations I had just with everyday people, things would come up like, oh, can you believe what they're doing for gay rights here and this and that? And then just having to physically be the like embodiment of something that the person opposite of you hates. And watching sometimes the stars fall from their eyes and them realize, oh, maybe like I don't love that it can fall to those who are oppressed to like help explain themselves and help demonstrate their humanity in somebody else's eyes. But I found so much of my time in West Virginia, particularly my last year living there in 2013, and I was being a professor and teaching stories, was just trying to present different views to students who had a very ingrained sense of conservatism that it wasn't my place to challenge, but my place to just demonstrate other ideas. And so I feel like any progress made is just going to be those difficult conversations with people who maybe don't even want you to exist. And I'm not saying that has to be your job and what you have to do. But for me, that's kind of the only way I can like move through the world, is trying to challenge that. And thanks for also putting up with my puppy in the background.
The number of views just went up exponentially when the dog made an appearance. Like 80 people just signed on for no reason other than that. That's not true, obviously. I really, really, really want to thank everyone. I do want to chastise our panel. No one mentioned the fact that JD Vance screamed at his kid about shut up about Pikachu for 30 seconds. I mean, anyone who doesn't love Pikachu, and if my camera were working, I would show you like the stuffed Pikachu that's sitting on my sofa. Just there's something both weird but also wrong about JD Vance. Again, really, really, really want to thank the five of you. And again, they're all doing amazing things. You'll get to see many of them in Shepherdstown soon if you're Shepherdstown adjacent, or certainly Google names and you'll be able to find, info about books when they're coming up. And want to thank the Shepherd professors who have joined, as someone who attended Shepherd along with Eileen and Bryan. I've always appreciated when professors show up, particularly for important events like this. So really appreciate that. And then also just want to thank all of the folks who are candidates who joined. I can't really see the list anymore because some people have dropped off, but I know that we had Christy Cardwell, who's running for state Senate. We had Troy Miller, who's running for state House, both here in West Virginia. And I think we had some other folks too who joined us. So appreciate that. So again, I will thank everyone and wish everyone a great evening. And again, to our panelists, really, 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 really appreciate your time this evening.
Thanks, Leigh.
Thank you.
Thanks to all of you.